Shock and horror mounted today as the death toll climbed following the murderous rampage of an Ozark mountain community. Officials counted 16 people dead, 14 of them members of the suspect's family.
Their worst fears came true. Searchers in the tiny Arkansas town of Dover this morning found the bodies of 9 missing members of the Gene Simmons family. 7 bodies were pulled from a freshly dug grave near the family house. 2 babies were found in garbage sacks in the trunks of these cars. But there's more. Last night, the bodies of 5 other family members who came home for the holidays were discovered throughout the house, making this killing ground the worst mass murder in Arkansas history. The man suspected of killing all these people, Gene Simmons, is the same man who yesterday allegedly killed 2 more people and wounded 4 others in nearby Russellville, Arkansas.
A mad dog, a recluse, a weirdo, and a nice guy. All descriptions of this man. So far, Gene Simmons has said nothing to police, showed no emotion, except at the mention of family.
When they would mention where his family was at, how we could contact his family, and this kind of thing, the investigator said the only thing then that he saw was his bottom lip would quiver.
Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. Christmas is a time for love and peace. Quality time spent with family. But in Dover, Arkansas, there is a dark past, a tragic history that lingers in the minds of those who live here. Some say it's even bled into the very dirt that bore witness to the horrors committed by Ronald Gene Simmons, the most prolific mass murderer in Arkansas history, and that you can still feel the darkness that he left behind to this day. Over a period of 6 days, Simmons killed 16 people, including 14 members of his own family, before finally being apprehended by the authorities. His crimes shocked the nation and continue to be remembered as one of the most gruesome acts of mass murder in American history. I myself have been a resident of Pope County, where these tragic murders took place, for the last 10 years of my life, and the toll that this man took on our community still weighs on the minds and hearts of his victims, their families, and the community at large. I have spoken to many people who met or knew the man personally, and will be sharing some of these accounts with you in this video. Born in 1940 in Chicago, Illinois, Ronald Gene Simmons led a difficult childhood, marked by poverty and abuse. His father died of a stroke when he was only 3 years old, and his mother remarried shortly after. He dropped out of school at the age of 17 and enlisted in the U.S. Navy. During his service, he was stationed in Washington, where he met a woman named Rebecca Ulibarri, whom he soon after married in New Mexico. The couple had 7 children together and moved frequently due to Simmons' military assignments. In 1963, Simmons left the Navy and joined the Air Force. Over the course of his 22-year military career, Simmons was presented with a Bronze Star, the Republic of Vietnam Cross, and the Air Force Ribbon for excellent marksmanship. He retired from the military in 1979 at the rank of Master Sergeant. Simmons was regarded as a strange, intense, and scary man. He was often confrontational over the smallest of things, and he was described as very domineering and intimidating. This dominating nature was no doubt fostered by his time and experiences within the U.S. military. He had a beer in his hand all the time. He had one little room he would stay in all the time. It was dark and seemed spooky, and it stunk, said a friend of his oldest daughters. Over the course of this time, Simmons had begun exhibiting abusive behaviors towards Rebecca and their children, and even initiated an incestuous relationship between himself and his daughter Sheila. On April 3, 1981, an investigation was opened by the Cloudcroft, New Mexico Department of Human Services due to allegations that Simmons had fathered a child with Sheila, who was 17 at the time. In the midst of all this, Simmons fled New Mexico with his family to Lonoke County, Arkansas. He struggled to find employment and had a history of volatile behavior, and largely kept to himself. In 1983, the family relocated to 13 acres of land in Dover, Arkansas, that would go on to become known as Mockingbird Hill. Their home consisted of 2 conjoined trailers surrounded by a makeshift privacy fence, reaching 10 feet tall at points. The home had no indoor plumbing. From 1983 to 1987, Simmons worked various jobs around Polk County. A friend and former co-worker of mine named Barbara had a brief encounter with Simmons in the summer of 1983 that I'd like to include here. I believe it was summer 1983. I was renting a guest house behind a house on B Street near the Ozark Mountain Smokehouse. I think that's what it was called. My landlady hired a man to paint the inside. I came home and he was there. I worked nights at Tyson, but at the time it was called Tasty Bird. I needed to get some sleep, and I wanted to get high, but with him there, I thought, I'll go outside and sit in my car, a '74 Javelin. I loved that car. Anyway, there were people out in the yard, so I came back in and asked him if it would bother him. He said no, and then I asked him if he wanted to get high. He said sure, and we smoked it from a pipe I had just made out of a beer can. I needed to crash, so I went to my room, which did not have a door, just a curtain. I wasn't laying there long before he was at the side of my bed, trying to make a pass at me. I must have sensed as crazy or something, because I blamed myself so he wouldn't get angry. Sometimes that's the safest way to reject a man, just in case. I told him it was my fault. I gave you the wrong impression. He left while I slept. He never finished the paint job. After the murders, there were all sorts of pictures coming out, but the one that stopped me cold was the one of his daughter's wedding. He didn't have the beard. It was him. My hand started shaking and I broke down and cried. Considering how he takes rejection and killed one woman because of it, I was glad he didn't know where I lived. Can you fucking believe it? I got high with Arkansas's worst mass murderer. It still gives me the creeps today. Anyway, that's it. Don't see how you can work it into the story, but it gives you a story of him that sure as hell ain't in the papers. Simmons never spoke about why he did what he did, but through investigation, police determined that there were a few catalysts that led to his murderous rampage. The first is the fact that Sheila got married and left the Simmons home. Simmons had originally intended on successful grooming and taking Sheila as his second wife. But his daughter had found the strength to leave, and found a good man that loved her. The second catalyst was Rebecca's choice to leave Simmons. Police found a letter from Rebecca to Ronald, detailing that she was fed up and unhappy and that she was leaving him. Thirdly, I found reports that shortly before the massacre, Sheila had outed Simmons as Sylvia's father. Reportedly, in a letter to Sheila after this incident, Simmons wrote, "You have destroyed me, and you have destroyed my trust in you. I will see you in hell." December 22nd, 1987, Simmons began his killing spree by bludgeoning Rebecca on the head before shooting and killing her with a .22 caliber pistol he had purchased from Walmart. He then immediately did the same to his visiting son, 29-year-old Gene. After this, he drowned his 3-year-old granddaughter Barbara in a rain barrel. Simmons disposed of all 3 bodies in a pit that he had previously had his children dig for an outhouse. Later that day, Simmons' 4 school-aged children arrived home on the school bus. Simmons told his children that he had gifts for them, but that he could only give them to them one at a time. So one by one, he took them behind the house and either strangled them or drowned them. Their names were Loretta, Eddie, Marianne, and Becky. He then disposed of their bodies in the same hole that his wife, oldest son, and granddaughter lay in. 4 days later, on December 26th, Simmons' 23-year-old son William arrived with his wife Renata and their 1-year-old son Trey for Christmas. Simmons shot and killed William and Renata in the home. Trey was then also strangled and drowned, wrapped in a trash bag, and placed in the trunk of an old vehicle behind the home. Simmons left Renata and William's bodies by the dining room table, covering their bodies with their coats. A little later in the day, Sheila, then 24 years old, her husband whose name was Dennis McNulty, and their children, 7-year-old Sylvia who was biologically the daughter of Ronald, Simmons shot and killed both Sheila and Dennis and strangled Sylvia and Michael. Michael was then wrapped in a trash bag and placed in the trunk of a different vehicle on the property than Trey was. Strangely enough, after massacring 14 members of his family, Simmons then got into his car and drove to Russellville, where I lived for 7 years of my life, to Sears, where he picked up some presents that he had ordered for his children for Christmas that had arrived late. Later that evening, he went to a local club for a beer, and then returned home. Once there, Simmons settled in, drinking beer and watching television all weekend, surrounded by the dead corpses of all of his loved ones. He laid all of the bodies out in neat rows on the floor, all covered by coats or sheets, except for Sheila's body, which was presented in a formal viewing state on the kitchen table. The bodies that were placed into the pit were soaked in kerosene to keep the animals away, and then buried with dirt and barbed wire. On the following Monday, December 28th, Simmons drove back to Russellville. First, he went to Walmart and purchased a second .22 caliber revolver. After acquiring this weapon, his first stop was at Peel, Eddy, and Gibbons law firm, where he shot and killed Secretary Kathy Kendrick, who had done nothing but deny his sexual advances in the past. Next, Simmons drove to the Taylor Oil Company, owned by Rusty Taylor, who owned the Sinclair Mini Mart where Simmons had previously worked at. Simmons shot and wounded Rusty, but thankfully he would live. A part-time driver for Taylor, as well as a firefighter named J.D. Chaffin, was not so lucky. Chaffin had no idea what he was walking into when he opened the door to the Taylor Oil Company, and was shot and killed point-blank by Simmons immediately. Simmons then headed towards the Sinclair Mini Mart that Taylor owned, his previous workplace. Arriving with the intention of killing his former supervisor, Joyce Butts, he shot her in the head and chest, but she would survive. He also shot a woman named Roberta Woolery and a man named David Sawyer, who would both also survive their injuries. Simmons then drove to another location, the Woodline Motor Freight Company, where he shot and injured another woman. He then took a worker at gunpoint to the office and advised her to call the police. Allegedly, Simmons told her, "I've done what I came to do. It's over now. I've gotten everyone who wanted to hurt me." He surrendered himself to the police when they arrived, all the fight gone from him. Simmons refused to speak to police regarding his motives, but was declared sane and competent for trial by the Arkansas State Hospital in Little Rock. The jury took less than 6 hours to convict Simmons of 16 counts of capital murder, with the sentence of death by lethal injection plus 147 years. Simmons refused all opportunities to appeal this decision. Interestingly enough, when the letter written by his wife Rebecca was ruled inadmissible in court, Simmons lashed out, punching the prosecutor in the face, and attempted to take a deputy's handgun in the scuffle. On May 31, 1990, then-Governor Bill Clinton signed Simmons' execution warrant. This was the fastest time from sentencing to execution in U.S. history since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. When covering truly evil people, it is my tendency and desire to find what little good existed in these people, to highlight what made them the way that they are, so that we can prevent these individuals from being created in our society in the future. In the case of Ronald Gene Simmons, I have not found one shred of good about this man. I believe that he was truly one of the most evil, vile, and despicable monsters that this world has ever seen. Thank you for watching this episode of True Crime. This is a subject that I have wanted to cover for a very long time, given my local connection to it. My wife grew up just down the road from where this all took place, and my brother-in-law saw the crime scene itself after the police were gone. Knowing how sensitive the subject is, I've been doing my best to approach it with the respect and dignity that the victims in our community deserve. I hope I have achieved this goal. In the description of this video, I will be including the National Sexual Abuse Hotline as well as the National Suicide Hotline. If you are in need, please speak out. So, take some time today to spend time with your loved ones and cherish them. Never forget, monsters from the grimiest places often have the prettiest faces.